Hey, good morning. I have right at 10:30, so we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us for our Beef Brunch Educational Series webinar series. This will be the first webinar in a series of three, and we'll discuss the following two webinars coming up. But we wanted to focus the theme of this particular webinar series on supplementation during the fall and winter and looking at what you need planning going forward, particularly during that transition period from warm season forages up to cool season forages. So my name is Ashley Edwards. I serve as our state extension beef cattle specialist for the LSU Ag Center. And again, I'm grateful to y'all for being on today. I also have Miss Brittany Zombrecker on with me to help moderate the Q&A session. So I'm new to using the town hall settings here. We used to use live events through Microsoft Teams for our webinars. So please bear with me if there might be a lag in some of these things. And I'm going to leave my camera off just hopefully to make sure that we maintain good internet service and connectivity for you. So today, I really want to focus just on how much hay do my cows need. And so we're going to focus again a lot on that transition period from warm season forage grazing to cool season forages, but walk you through particularly how to calculate your hay needs for your entire herd. Because that is a question that we get. I say we being livestock agents, livestock and forage agents throughout the state. How much hay do I need to buy this year? How much hay am I going to need to have for my entire herd as we move through this? Last year we had such a large drought, as you all know, and we fed hay a lot longer than we had anticipated. This year, our drought monitor looks much better, but we are in a dry period right now when we would typically be planting our cool season forages. And I can tell you at our Hill Farm Research Station in Homer, as well as our Dean Lee Research Station in Alexandria, we're behind. We have not planted yet, and so we anticipate it being a little bit later before we start grazing our ryegrass mixes that we plant. So every year is a little bit different, but we do have particular principles that we can follow in terms of these calculations. So we'll work through this. We're going to follow these 4 steps that we have right here. Who are you feeding? I originally had this written as what are you feeding, and changed it as who are you feeding in terms of the size, the age, and the physiological stage of your cattle that you are feeding. So what are their particular nutrient requirements? From there, you have to look at the quality of your hay. And we'll start on that. We're going to do quality, I guess more so as a general concept today is what we're going to look at. Next week's webinar, I'll refer to it a couple of times, but Abigail is going to come in and talk a lot more on hay quality and how to specifically meet crude protein and TDN, total digestible nutrients or energy requirements. From there, how much hay is going to be wasted? Because unfortunately, they don't eat every single little bitty stalk that we put out there. So we can anticipate some hay wastage coming in through that. And then approximately how many days do you estimate that you're going to be feeding hay? So we're going to walk through these steps and work through exactly how you would calculate this. Again, please feel free to use the Q&A and type your questions into that at any point. Brittany, if you see any of those pop up and we get to kind of a stopping point, or you think I need to answer that right then we can go ahead and stop the webinar or stop my presentation for just a moment and we can discuss that question. So before we get started, I do want to point out just kind of a foundation principle here that when we start looking at any of our feedstuffs, whether it be hay or some of our concentrates, grains, anything like that, we want to focus on the percent of nutrients on a dry matter basis. And that's as simple, I mean, it's exactly what it says it is. It's the nutrients in the feed once we have dehydrated it or once we've taken out the water portion of that. So that gives you the true amount of nutrient that animal is going to be consuming. From there, we do have to realize that what we actually put into the feed bunk or into the hay ring does have water in it. So we start our calculations off on a dry matter basis. We then look at the percent moisture, we add that in, and that will give us the overall pounds of, in this case, hay that we will be feeding. So that will give you your projected intake. And again, that ensures that we are meeting the specific nutritional requirements of our particular animals. So that will make sense, hopefully, as we work through this math. So again, who are you feeding? So what are the particular nutrient requirements of those animals based off of, are they growing? Are they pregnant? Are they lactating? What's their overall size? And what do you have there? We actually had this discussion, I guess it's been a few months now, in one of our livestock and forage agents meeting on what do we assume the average cow size is. So if somebody calls us and says, hey, we need you to put together a ration for us, and they don't have scales, they have no idea what their animal weighs, what do we anticipate or estimate the average cow size to be? Excuse me. And we've kind of bumped that up. So we've seen trends over time where animals get smaller. So if you think back to what we call the belt buckle cattle, back in the mid 1900s, versus once we started pushing into the 1980s, 1990s, we got very large in terms of frame size. We kind of moderated back down. For a while, we were looking at an average herd size of 1,000. All that to say that now we kind of just estimate across the US our average cow size to be 1,200 pounds at maturity. That being said, if I were to be calculating this, I'll say at the Dean Lee Research and Extension Center, we have larger Brangus type cows. We are actually pushing frame size a little bit larger than what I would like to see. And Dr. Vitavato and I have discussed bringing that back down. But I would estimate 1,400 pounds mature cow size on that. So I'm going to use 1,200 as our average for these calculations, but you have to ask yourself, is that accurate for your herd? And if you don't have scales, then look at what your cull cows have brought. So the last few cull cows that you've taken to the barn, to the sale barn, what was their average weight? You know, were they a little bit on the thinner side? So do you need to bump that number up? That's just a good way to look at that. And then I mentioned earlier the physiological stage. So think about your calving seasons. If we're talking the cows specifically, you know, if we're looking at this fall feeding season and we have spring calving cows, they're typically going to be dry. We just weaned and somewhere between mid to late gestation when hay's being fed. If you have a fall calving herd, then you're going to have higher nutrient requirements because they'll be during early lactation to mid lactation during this hay feeding season. And so we know what the nutrient requirements are. You can see here we've got very detailed requirements based off of even the cow's weight, but the expected birth weight, how much they need. DM is going to be dry matter, so how much feed are they going to need on a dry matter basis. Looking at energy in terms of total digestible nutrients, as well as their net energy for maintenance, which is that NEM there. Crude protein, and then we can get all the way down into not just calcium and phosphorus, but other minerals as well. So we can get as detailed as we want to. These are from the National Research Council requirements, this particular chart being from Oklahoma State, but they've kind of looked at these on an average, and average across the US is what you're seeing highlighted there in gray. So you can get down into the weeds as much as you want. Again, for today, we're going to kind of focus more on general averages and what we're looking at there for our calculations. But I will say this in every presentation I give, I'll say it multiple times today. Your extension service, us, your extension agents, we are here to help you. And so we'll look at the goal of today being how many bales do you need per cow for this year? Next week, Abigail's going to get into more detail. The following week, Marcelo is going to talk minerals. So we're going to build off of this and get into the details even more. But we're here to help you. So once we're here to help you take your hay samples, we're here to help you send those off. We're here to help you find the different supplemental feeds that you may or may not need as you go through your entire production year. So some general rules of thumb. So if we want to keep this just kind of as an average across the board, we can say that our pregnant spring calving cows are going to consume approximately 2% of their body weight on a dry matter basis of good quality hay. So again, focusing on quality, Abigail will get more into that next week, but what does good quality mean? Let's say 8% crude protein. If we want to go back and look at some of these other charts in terms of TDN, I like to say 55% TDN, but if you're looking at dry, mature cows, you can get by with 50% TDN somewhere in there for your good quality. So 50 to 55% TDN, 8% crude protein, we'll call that, and you can't see me, but I'm using my air quotes here. That's going to be your good quality hay. Lactating cows are going to consume more, anywhere from 5 to 10 pounds more, or if you're going to do that on a percent of their body weight, say 2.6%. When I teach nutrition to youth, or when I was teaching it at Louisiana Tech, when I was teaching animal science classes, I say on average, regardless of cattle, sheep, goats, whatever, animals eat anywhere from 2 to 3% of their body weight. And so we saw a while ago in those charts that a lactating animal is going to require more in terms of overall nutrition and nutrients. Same thing with growing cattle. So 2% on our dry cows is on the lower average there. Once we think about them calving, we're looking at 2.6% of their body weight. If you want to do this and you want to calculate 3% and overestimate, I am all for that. That's typically where I would actually probably go, just because I get nervous and err on the side of caution. But I say that and realizing that hay costs money, whether you're baling it and putting it up yourself or having to purchase it from somebody. So know that good, if we're looking at good quality hay, 2% for spring calving cows, 2.6% for our lactating cows. I should have said 2% for your dry cows, excuse me, dry gestating cows, 2.6% for lactating on good quality hay. What happens if we have a year like last year and we don't have great quality hay just due to drought, and we're feeding whatever it is we can get a hold of? Well, if it's lower quality, if digestibility is lower or poor, it's going to take that feed longer, or that hay longer, to go through the body. So they stay fuller longer because digestion takes longer, and they eat less overall. So if you have a lower quality hay, then you estimate only about 1.5% of their body weight. Again, if it's going to be poor quality hay, you're not going to be able to get by with only feeding hay. And so we will end up needing to supplement some sort of feed on the side in addition to the hay that you're giving. We're focusing more so on the cows today, just again to give you these principles of how to calculate this. Bulls, you look at 2.5% of their body weight if you're going to do a general rule of thumb for how to estimate the amount that they need. Growing cattle, in my mind, I go straight to 3%. They're going to consume anywhere from 2.5 to 3% of their body weight on good quality hay. That one I typically would encourage you to go more on the 3% calculation there. So that way you don't hinder any of your average daily gains on your calves. So again, we're going to work through an example problem today and go step by step on the different considerations that you would have. Let's say that we are feeding a mature 1,200 pound spring calving cow right now. Excuse me, when we're recording this in the fall. So she is dry. We've already weaned, and in moving from mid gestation and then later into later gestation. So the three big things that we look at: dry matter intake, crude protein, and TDN, total digestible nutrients. If we looked at those requirements for her, 24 pounds of dry matter intake, so 24 pounds of feed on a dry matter basis. We would want at least 1.5 pounds of that to be crude protein, and 10.5 pounds of that to be energy or TDN. So I put this in here just if you are looking at quality of hay, at least look at these three things. Again, we can get a lot more detailed, and Abigail and Dr. Vitavato are going to get into that more so in the next couple of webinars. But I always want to hound all three of these. And the reason being is most of the time people want to just focus on crude protein. They'll look at their hay analysis or any of their feed analysis, and they'll say, okay, I just want to meet the crude protein requirements. Well, if that feed is not digestible or that hay is not digestible, it doesn't matter how much crude protein's in there because they're not going to be able to access all of it. So for the purpose of calculating this, what is going to be our dry matter percentage of our hay? That's going to be anywhere from 7 to 15%, depending on when it gets baled. I pulled, this is an older hay sample that I pulled where the dry matter was 89.3%. So roughly 11% moisture there. If we wanted to look at the crude protein in TDN, just to show you that we're going to consider this to be, a good quality hay, you're looking at crude protein at 9.8%, and then TDN was at 56.5%. Always, always, always test your hay. It is worth it. It's one of those things that I think producers take for granted. I'll tell on us. Hopefully Lee Falk doesn't get upset, but we were feeding some hay at the hill farm, and we were just behind. We were behind on getting it sent off. It was just one of those years that everything fell on top of each other, and we sent our hay samples off late to test it for a project, and we got it back, and it was a lot lower than what we had anticipated it to be. And so we looked at it compared to previous years. It was not a bad year. It wasn't a drought year. It was nothing crazy. I would just call it an average year. And we got that hay back, and we said, well, thank goodness we had some supplement going along with it, because we inadvertently did meet all the nutrient requirements of those calves. But had we just been supplementing hay thinking it was much higher quality than it was, we would have been in trouble. So always, always test your hay. It's worth it. Again, get with your local extension agent, and we'll help you take care of that. So as we continue to work through our calculations here, we're just going to say, I like easy math. I just said 10% moisture. So I'm not using the previous example specifically. I'm just going to say we have 10% moisture or 90% dry matter of our hay. So when we looked at her dry matter requirements on, her pounds of dry matter at a 2% of her body weight, that was 24 pounds. Okay, so we know that our hay is not 100% dry matter, so we do have to take into account that 10% moisture. So when we do that calculation and we divide by the percent of dry matter, that is going to give us her requirements being 26.67 pounds. Always round up to a whole number. So 27 pounds of hay needed per day on an as-fed basis. So if you were actually weighing out that hay and putting it straight in front of that cow, you would want to weigh out specifically at least 27 pounds. How much hay will be wasted? Wastage comes in a couple different forms. How you store it, and I've got charts on that towards the end of this presentation, but largely also how we feed it. So the type of feeding method that you utilize, whether you're utilizing a hay ring, if you're just putting it on the ground, if you're setting it on the ground and not unrolling it versus setting it on the ground, rolling it, excuse me, all of that's going to play a role in how much hay gets wasted. So it's a pretty large range, anywhere from 6 to 20% on average is what's wasted, or even more. And that chart that I'll show later shows up to 50% can be wasted. We don't have time to really get into this today, but we do have a fantastic webinar with Dr. Dave Lawman from Oklahoma State Extension Service. They have done a lot of work on this. And so I'll have that linked here. We can put that, I'll put it into the chat later for those that are live once we wrap up. But then also put it in the video description as well if you're watching this at a later date. If you have trouble finding it and you want to look for it later, always just send me an email and I'm happy to get that for you. So moving from needing 27 pounds on an as-fed basis, let's assume 15% of our hay is going to be wasted. So take that 27 pounds of hay, divide it by 85%. That's actually going to be used. And that's going to end up rounding us up to needing 32 pounds of hay on an as-fed basis, assuming 15% wasted. So we've gone up from saying, okay, well, if she only needs 2% of her body weight, that's 24 pounds, to actually needing to feed a total of 32 pounds per day, to actually be able to meet her requirements. So that's a good bit more. And again, that's a little bit on the higher end of wasted hay, but err on the side of caution anytime that you're able to. So from that, you know how much you need per day. How many days are you going to be feeding? I'm going to keep it short and focus on what I would call our primary hay feeding season. Just because most producers do take advantage of cool season annual forages. We start grazing at different points in time here, just based off of when the forage is available. I always use the two research stations that I work on. So the Hill Farm up north in Homer, we are usually able to turn out mid-December on that. Sometimes early December. This year, if we can get them out by the end of the year, into the calendar year, we'll be doing well, just because planting is occurring so much later due to a lack of rainfall right now. We usually use the first of the year, or as soon as we come back from Christmas break, is when we turn out at the Dean Lee station there in Alexandria. So just kind of depending on where you're at and when you get those forages planted. But say you're going to turn out around the first of the year, and then you're able to take advantage of those forages on a good year until April or May before they become too mature. So I'm going to say again, our primary hay feeding season being during that transition from warm to cool season forages for grazing. So October through December for the purposes of this particular calculation, and that's going to be 92 days. However, I'm putting the caveat in that you always want to estimate that some hay is going to be fed after the first of the year until you are able to have warm season forages again. So moving into 32 pounds needed on an as-fed basis every day, assuming 92 days is when we are going to be feeding. And that is going to put us at 2,944 pounds of hay per cow. So that's fantastic. But I'm not weighing all of my hay all the time. I want to know on a per bale basis. How many bales of hay do I need to make sure I have underneath the barn to be able to make it through this particular year? And I say that, but bale weight is highly variable. One of our favorite things to do at a field day is to do a contest where producers just look at bales of hay and estimate the weight of them, but also estimate which one is going to be of higher quality. So you cannot look at hay and say, you know, this 5x5 bale is always going to weigh 950 pounds. Okay, it's going to vary, and it can vary each year. So anytime you're able to either weigh a load of hay for having it trucked to you, or weigh a bale and get an average weight on those, we highly recommend that. We do have this chart here that I presented from Georgia that kind of gives you an estimate there. So if you are going to estimate, I would always go on the lower density here and the lower weights, just to err on the side of caution for how much you're going to actually end up needing. So for our example, we needed 2,944 pounds of hay per cow, and that is just from October through December. I just picked an average bale weight of 1,100 pounds. And once we go through and do that calculation, it gives us 2.68 bales per cow. So always round that up to 3 bales. I am sure that I'm not the only one sitting on this webinar that has heard an average of 5 bales per cow. If somebody asks me and I have no idea what they're getting into, I always just say at least 5 bales per cow to be able to make it through the year. So that's from the fall all the way through until you're following hay season, when you're able to start, or I'm sorry, the following season when you're able to start grazing warm season forages and start baling again as well. So however you want to look at that, I highly recommend calculating, of course. That's why we're having this discussion and going through this webinar and calculate it all the way up. Again, this is only going through December, so you want to look at your lactation requirements and are you doing any cool season forages or not, and calculate that as well. Again, that's where we come into play. We can work with you and will work with you to be able to figure out exactly how much you need. I mentioned earlier other considerations for losses. So if you look on the left side of the screen here, we're looking at different storage methods. And I know that Dr. Wink Allison has touched on this some in some of our in-person events, excuse me. And I cannot remember now if we have that recorded or not. I feel like I do have one from Wink somewhere recorded on this, but looking at different storage methods here, these two charts are both from Mississippi State. I pulled them off a PDF. I apologize. They're a little bit fuzzy, but I can send you the resource to this as well. But we said in the chart earlier, or in the slide earlier, that we look at hay waste when we start feeding anywhere from 6 to up to 20%. So if you look at the feeding systems on the right, you can see anywhere from very efficient hay rings where you're not losing much at all the way up to, if you're feeding on the ground, losing about 28%. And so we talked about that. We did not talk about calculating wastage based off of storage methods, but that's another thing to consider as well. So if you do not have any kind of covered storage, whether that be a tarp or not, if you were storing just on the ground, you don't have any sort of pad or anything that you're storing it on, no tarps or anything, of course, your waste is going to be a lot higher and can be anywhere up to 50%. So hay losses are highly, highly variable. And this is a great resource to be able to look at. After we've walked through all these calculations too, I am going to tell you that Mississippi State does have a great Excel sheet that utilizes, or that you can utilize, excuse me, as a calculator to be able to go through and calculate exactly what you're going to need for your hay for the season. And just because I feel like this can never be emphasized enough, always test. This is a slogan that we use on soil tests because those are very relevant as well. But always test your hay too. So soil, hay, whatever it is, don't just estimate, don't just guess, don't just go off an average. Even if we're going from year to year, think about that example that I gave earlier at the Hill Farm. We've been baling hay there for decades, but sometimes you just have an off year for whatever reason. And so it always will behoove you to have those samples sent off and tested. And again, our agents are happy to help you do that. So I hope that today gave you just kind of some foundational principles. Particularly, my goal was how many bales do you need and how do you calculate that? We went on an average year. This year, I encourage overestimating how much hay you're going to need, even more so than I would on a normal year, just because we are planting a little bit later. Hopefully we don't stay dry. Hopefully we have a great year. But just the way things are this week, and even forecasted into the next few weeks, I know quite a few of us are getting a little bit nervous about getting our cool season annuals planted and when they're going to come up. So again, to build off of this, next week, Miss Abigail Sargent is going to be on, and her talk will be, what do I do when my hay falls short? So I'm sure some of you have some questions on crude protein and TDN and all of those things. How do you supplement? How do you know how much to supplement? What are your options within the state or within your area for what you can purchase and what you can store? And she's going to cover that. And then the following Tuesday, Dr. Marcello is going to come in and discuss mineral nutrition as well. So hopefully between the three of these, we really kind of cover what you need for your fall and winter supplementation. We do have additional resources that I've mentioned already. So please feel free to go through and look at our YouTube channel, LSU Ag Center Livestock. Scroll through our previous beef brunch webinars, and you'll see some additional information there as well. So I hope, again, that this was beneficial. If you have any questions, I'm going to hang out for just a couple of minutes. Please put those into the Q&A. If you think of any questions later, whether you're watching the recording of this at a later date, or if you're on now and you think of some questions later on, Here's my contact information. Always feel free to contact me. I don't have my number on here, but my cell phone's scattered throughout everywhere as well. That number is 512-818-5476. I just ask that if it's work related, please be respectful of work hours. If you call me after work hours, I'll get back with you the following day. Brittany, I don't see anything on my end on the Q&A. Am I missing anything?
I don't see anything either.
Okay. Well, I appreciate y'all again joining us today. Please reach out to me, reach out to your local extension office for any assistance with this. I am not a trained nutritionist, if you can tell by the way this presentation went. I know the basics and can do the basics, but Dr. Vitavato, Ms. Abigail, Dr. Hutchison, we have several people that are great with nutrition across the state, and they can assist you as well. So reach out to any of us and we will help. Again, hopefully you'll be able to jump on next week and get even more detail in this with Abigail's presentation. Thank y'all and have a great day.